We've got Jon Holmes and James Johnson now with us here on the podcast. So as we mentioned at the start of it, it's now 20 years since the club came out of administration, and Jon and James were huge parts of that, along with Gary Lineker all them years ago. And yeah, I know we've got loads of questions about that. I mean, the first one, really an obvious one for me, Jon, to go to you first, was how on earth did you come about to be a part of that group? And what was that like at the time? It must have been incredibly surreal.
Well, it was clear early in that season that the club were in some kind of a mess, in that I got a proposal early in the season. They were short of money. Would I consider some loan stock and so on and so on? And to be honest, given the people who were running the club at that point, I wasn't absolutely very keen on that. Mistakes have been made earlier. The decision to go public was pretty disastrous, and a lot of nonsense was talked at that time, and I think the finances got out of control. Then they had this sort of triple whammy. They lost Martin O'Neill, which at some point was going to be inevitable. Their recruitment process for a new manager was a bit disastrous. They ended up with Peter Taylor, who was never going to work, to be honest, despite the fact they started very well and astonishingly went to the top of the league first time for ages and ages. Yeah. But I'd come across Taylor before. He was no kind of a manager. He was, he was a sort of part-time Norman Wisdom impersonator. And his ability to sign players, being as they got quite a bit of money for Heskey, they sort of frittered that away. 2 players who were technically blind, and several others who had no idea how to play. Added to that, they moved into the new stadium. The board were all squabbling with each other most of the time, and ITV Digital collapsed. So it was pretty inevitable a few weeks later when they said they'd gone into administration. And at that point, Greg Clark approached me and he said he had this plan to put together a group of local shareholders, nobody having a great majority. Shareholdings you would need to put in between 100 and 250,000. We were going to raise 5 million, and would Gary be the sort of icon to lead this on? And Gary and I had a chat, and he said, "Yeah, but I can't do any work. You'll have to do the work." I went back to Greg and told him that would be the case. He was happy enough with that. The other Greg Dyke, gave Gary permission to do it. At that point, he was Director General of the BBC. And we set about raising money and recruiting people. And then James came along, which was a massive bonus, because James said, "I will do the legal work for nothing." And he worked for one of the Magic Circle firms in the city. So that was a big bonus. I confess my hope all the way along was that Mr. Big would emerge from somewhere and say, "No, I'm going to put in a bid and take the whole lot," because I wasn't quite sure that we were ever going to raise enough money the other way. There were 1 or 2 people who technically could have done that. David Ross was one who'd made money out of the Carphone warehouse sale. He had a house in the county at Neville Holt. He was from Grimsby originally. I knew him quite well. We were quite friendly, but he wasn't that committed to football or to the idea, to be honest. David Wilson Holmes was the other, and he wouldn't answer the phone to us. He wouldn't even answer the phone to Gary, so we gave that one up fairly quickly. So we set about collecting, dribs and drabs of money. Some people put in decent amounts, and we got to about $1 million or so short of that. One of the great moments of that, and one of the best things, was getting the call from Emil Heskey to say that he would put the money in, which I thought was a fantastic gesture from a really nice lad who was a Leicester boy, wasn't a Leicester supporter, never was, unfortunately. Victim of the television age, he was a Liverpool supporter. But anyway, the fact that he was prepared to put money in was great. We had one or two others who put money in, and we got to 4 million. And Greg said, "Oh, we can just about do that. I'll talk to the administrator." We'd been plagued all the time by the prospect of one or two of the former directors in the shape of Roy Parker and Gilbert Kinch trying to buy the club. I knew from experience of them that that would have been a total disaster. And that made me fairly keen that we got over the line. And during these discussions, I said, this is all very well, but who's going to be chairman? And Greg Clark said, well, we think you should be. Now, I'd never wanted to be a football club chairman. I'd been offered, ironically, the post of CEO a long time before that, when Trevor Bennett tried to take the club over. He failed in his takeover, which saved me the turning Trevor down. But so we ended up where we were. But we were never really, to get a football club really well up and running, you have to have a harmonious team. You have to have the football side and the administration side working together, to cliche singing off the same hymn sheet. And we didn't. In retrospect, we made one or two mistakes. I made one or two mistakes. Although we got up and Mickey Adams and Dave Bassett were working together then, and it did well. And then we didn't have a director of recruitment, which we should have done, but we probably couldn't afford one. Dave Bassett bought some defenders who were people who couldn't defend. And although he bought some attackers who definitely could attack, and we were unlucky to go down. Actually, we had 3 players up front scored 10 goals when we did get up front. But we, in the first place, got promoted, which was excellent. And I took that as an opportunity to say, right, I'm the most successful chairman in the club's history. I've only lost 1 game, and that was ridiculous, losing it in the 9th minute of stoppage time when there'd only been signalled about 3. So I'll jump off the side.
I thought you might mention that, Dad. You mention it quite often. Yeah, no, James. And I haven't really spoken to you about this, James. But your role as legal, I don't actually know what your title was when you were on the board. Presumably, you had a more grand title than legal person, I presume. But you got involved in some quite interesting stuff during that time. I presume.
Well, we had all sorts of interesting stuff. So yeah, I sort of, when I got involved, I was a banking partner at Clifford Chance, and I wrote to Greg on a Friday, and Greg was in my office on the Tuesday, and told me what was going on, and then invited him up to Leicester to meet with John and Tim Davis, who'd literally written in as an accountant as well. So we set the whole thing up. It was the fundraising. It was quite funny because, as John said, we struggled. It was just after the .com crash. People didn't have the money, so we needed, I think, to raise. I think it was 6 million in the end, and we were struggling. And things went with the form. It was literally like one critical game in it all was Reading away. If we won, it would look like promotion was, favourite there. We would probably get promoted. But if we lost, we suddenly went into the also ran category, and the fundraising was at a very tricky level. And fortunately, we won 3-1. And actually, on the way home at Reading platform, I managed to get 25 grand off one lucky Leicester City supporter who, in the euphoric moment, stuck his hand up. So that was it. So we're putting it together. And then, as John said, one of the funniest ones was, you had Kinch and Parker, who were supposedly putting together this rival consortium. But then I was tipped off that somebody said to me, you don't need to worry about that. Gilbert Kinch has fallen for one of these Nigerian scams. And Kinch Kinch had Kinch's coach, a very respectable Leicester company. But if you remember those scams, there were emails where, you know, the grammar was appalling, the spelling was reported, and they invited you to make some sort of investment somewhere. Well, anyway, he gave them unbelievably £2 million. So that absolutely scuppered their bid, whatever else they were thinking. So we went on, and we had some, you know, we went on, and then there was a very funny one, actually. 2 weeks after we were into it, in my real day job, I was invited to do a small dinner at HSBC by their restructuring group. And blow me, there was about 12 of us invited, but one of the others was Nick Dargan, the administrator, by pure chance. So we got in there and got to know him. And Nick, despite being a Man U fan, was extraordinarily helpful. And I'm sorry to say that today, obviously. But so we went on, but it wasn't all plain sailing. As John said, we ended up short. We were granted exclusivity on the day of the Millwall game. And one of the great things was that Millwall's fans had been misbehaving yet again. So if you remember, they were banned from all away grounds that season. So when the announcement was made, the whole stadium was absolutely packed full of Leicester, nobody else. And it was wonderful. It was a little unfortunate when Steve Claridge put them up 1-up after 5 minutes, but we won 4-1. It was a euphoric day. But unfortunately for us doing it, at that point assumed we were there. And we weren't. And the club was still losing money. And we basically had to do a deal with teachers who were the mortgagee of the stadium, but effectively owned it. And we had to get their debt down and everything. But we would continue to negotiate, but the club was running out of money. And so just before Christmas, we needed, I think it was £750,000. And there's no guarantee we were going to come out. Well, teachers stumped up 500,000. And then the 5 of us, so John, Gary, Greg, Tim and me, stumped up 50 each to put in. And that kept the club going over Christmas. And, you know, we were going on and on, but we still hadn't agreed to deal with teachers. And we basically were going to run out of cash first thing in the new year. And anyway, I remember being at work on New Year's Eve. And at 8 o'clock on New Year's Eve, I agreed the deal with teachers to write down their debt. And at that point was safe. And I went straight up to my local, I was in London, and I got in the car, drove up to Barkby, where I come from, and met my brother and my mates in the pub to celebrate New Year's Eve and give them the good news. And it was just wonderful.
I think
sure the pub
James lived in a different world to the rest of us. You know, he talks about the dot-com boom. We got money from people who made pies and people that sold milk.
I know, but our best one.
Wasn't very high tech.
No, John, the best one was we were the king of the hauliers, weren't we? We had all the hauliers.
Yep. We were very basic tradesmen from Leicester.
Yeah, and I will say one of the great things for me, I met so many wonderful people through it. There's a whole load there who stumped up and you got to know them, and they were really great people. Most of them absolute passionate Leicester fans. One or two weren't, one or two coming in for the ride. You know, and then I just remembered. And then we had the directors, and it was, do you remember Peter Hockenhull?
Yep.
And he put in 100,000, to be fair to him, and he said, look, you know, I want to be a director. I want to be a director. And anyway, we said, no, you can't ask that, can't. And in the end, we said, look, to get his money, you're going. But he did come up with one of the funniest lines I've ever heard when we played Chelsea away. And it was Abramovich's first home game. Now, Peter Hockenhull at the time owned 6 petrol stations in Leicestershire. And anyway, he somehow got to Abramovich in the boardroom at Chelsea, and through the interpreters, he went up to him and he said, hello, my name's Peter Hockenhull. I believe we're in the same line of business. He had 6 petrol stations in Leicestershire, and Abramovich had God knows what.
Yeah, I think he hadn't, neither had Hockenhull got the assets of an entire region, which he raped, but that's another matter.
It was its high point. Sorry, I digress.
It's really interesting to hear this, because I remember when I was, I was similar age to Jack, grew up in the Premier League years under O'Neill. And I remember my dad used to say, you know, this is as good as it gets, as good as it gets. And then we got the new ground, and I was thinking, oh, bloody hell, we're massive, we are. And obviously we would go down and come straight back up, and then went back down. But obviously after just losing to United, it's kind of a bit humbling, really. It brings me back down to earth a little bit. But I was just wondering about all these owners in the Premier League now. Obviously, you've got the Qataris looking at United. Americans just got Chelsea. Just what you think to all the swathes of money now in the Prem, and you know, I think just purely because of the past, and you know, when you guys were there, like little old Leicester still competing and still winning trophies, how much of an achievement that really is. And obviously the ties have been absolutely fantastic for us at King Power.
Well, it was, we were, in a sense, as I say, I was hoping that Mr. Big would come along. He didn't, clearly. Maybe because we set out, maybe because we only looked in the English market. This was Greg's plan, which we stuck to. And, you know, I do well. I thought it was a nice way to run a football club, to have it sort of locally controlled and so on. It's the way Leicester had always been. I think the sad thing was, you see, Leicester overperformed for a long period during their history. But after the war, they did do okay, really. They came back. They were controlled by several fairly shrewd businessmen. And then as time went on, the shrewd businessmen handed their businesses and their roles onto their not so shrewd offspring, or a new generation. Sid Needham was second generation anyway, and he wasn't. I mean, Sid was a nice bloke, but not very good. Chiefly remembered for when the FA Cup draw was taken, he dropped all the balls on the floor live on the draw. Terry Shipman was not as shrewd, I don't think, as his dad. Alf Pallett had no hair. Tom Bloor, again, his son wasn't interested, was interested, went on and off, but in the end wasn't that interested. Dennis Sharp didn't have an heir who was very good. So the old families sort of, they tried to hang on to the club, bring the odd new people in, but they all had to come in on their terms. Nobody got control. Colin McLeod, who was quite shrewd, I think probably, but didn't understand football, came in, left fairly quickly. Bill Page just wanted the prestige of the whole thing, and I'd never thought he was that clever. And Martin George came on, but Martin George didn't have the money that he has now. One of possibly the mistakes that I made was I sacked Martin George off the board when I took over. Well, just after I took over. The reason for that was that Martin was very unpopular with the staff and had a very domineering manner. And the other board members, I felt, would never get a word in. In some cases, that would have been a decided bonus. But he didn't actually, at that point, have the money he had today. And about 2-3 years later, I can remember him saying to me in the boardroom, "Oh, you were silly to turn away. Now I've got all this money," because he inherited a lot. And then he's been very, very successful in his milling business. So he would now have the assets that could have taken us onto a different level at that point. And actually, he was not a bad chairman. His problem was that Martin had been thwarted in his own family business by his brother was very clever. His brother invented Weetabix, and actually his brother got him kicked off the family board, which was a big blow to Martin for his self-esteem and so on. So it's all about personalities and families and things that go wrong. And we didn't have the chemistry off the pitch or on the pitch together to make it go right. And of course, after a time, it broke down. We were unlucky when we got up. Say we didn't really have a defence. Dabizas was signed later on and was probably the best of the centre backs. We got Matt Elliott and all that generation, Taggart and Walshy had gone, so we were struggling to that degree.
John, I've got a question for you, if you don't mind. I mean, fascinating what you're saying. I could probably listen to you all day on this, but that era, another one of the reasons that we're all told about that we ended up in his administration was after the Dennis Wise debacle. And that horrendous agent Eric Hall with his monster catchphrase. Have you got any anecdotes to tell us about Eric?
Yeah, well, you've probably been tipped off about this. The first night I was chairman, I went into the boardroom, and I think it was Tony Lander, who would never take any responsibility for anything himself, but he came over and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Have you seen who's over there?" And it was Eric Hall, who I probably knew a little bit. He's an idiot. I'd once told him to shut up on the radio, on Radio 5 before, when he was talking nonsense. So I went over and said, "Eric, I'm sorry, but you're barred. Now please go away. You're not allowed in this room," and so on. And he said, "Who are you to say that?" I said, "I'm the chairman." So he said, "How long have you been that?" I said, "1 day. Now fuck off."
Superb.
And he got escorted into the thing. If I'd been really cruel, I'd have put him in the middle of the Leicester crowd, but apparently I don't know what they did with him. He wasn't that interested in football anyway, so he probably went home to Essex.
But if that followed on from Dennis Wise being one of the greatest cash flow savings at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, he went and following a pre-season do, he attacked Callum Davidson in bed after he lost at cards to him. Callum Davidson, who was he was another one who didn't have great eyesight, actually. We seemed to specialise in signing them at that point. Anyway, he wore contact lenses though and was slightly better than Akinbai, who didn't drive because he couldn't pass the eyesight driving test. And as a result, we were able to sack Dennis Wise without compensation.
Yeah, he was basically the nice Dennis Wise. He basically thumped Callum Davidson in the head while Davis was in bed, broke his jaw, put him out for 6 weeks. At the time, Dennis Wise was on £1 million a year, and his contract just got ripped up. And it was the administrator who did that. It was before we came on, but it represented money we didn't have to find, so it was a true cash flow saving. So thank you, Dennis. It's about the only thing we can thank you for.
Is that right? Because I mean, my memory might be a bit hazy, but I think there's been some misinformation over the years that one of the reasons we ended up in administration as well was because Eric Hall was owed money, and he sort of wouldn't. No, is that not true?
Not at all. Not at all. They tried to get a claim saying that Wise hadn't had due process, which was completely farcical. If that was on a Swedish pre-season tour, if it wasn't there and it happened here, Dennis Wise would have ended up being jailed. That's as simple as it is.
Speaking of overseas tours and players ending up in jail, James, is there any sort of lines or anecdotes you can share with us from La Manga that we might not have necessarily have heard?
How did I know you were going to bring this one up, Jack? Yeah. Well, we obviously, in the first season in the Premier League, we had this break in La Manga, and I was sitting at my desk, and suddenly Tim Davis was on the phone and saying, "We've got problems, etc. I'm going out there." So he went out there, find out what it is, and then it came out there was these 3 girls who were alleging that our players had misbehaved with them and everything. And so Tim said, "Can you sort of take control of looking into it?" And I said, "All right, okay." I said, "First thing is we're going to have to sit each player down and get the truth off them. And you have to tell them, they have to tell us the old legal phrase, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And also tell them, if we find that they have subsequently lied in any respect, their contract will be ripped up, and that's likely to be the least of their problems." And they all did, and they all gave accounts. And to be fair to them, and then, sorry, I should say then of course, these 3 girls were interviewed by the police, and we get their witness statements, but those are in Spanish. Now, rather fortuitously, in my group at work, I had a lovely girl who was a secondee from the Madrid office, and she wasn't that busy at the time. So I said to her, I said, look, could you possibly translate these for me? I said, if you see anything, read anything you don't like or upsets you, whatever, just give them straight back to me. But I said, if you do that, I'll buy you and your husband dinner. Anyway, she did it for me. I will say the Spanish obviously eat at very expensive restaurants, because I nearly went broke over that dinner, the things you do for Leicester City. But I got all the statements. I've got the players, I've got the girl statements, and there was not a single crime committed by any of those Leicester players. In fact, the only crime that could have been committed was by one of the girls who assaulted Paul Dickoff by trying to rip off his bracelet. There was so much misidentification as well. Poor old James Scowcroft had been in his bedroom and he'd phoned his wife late at night. Yet he was identified as one of the people who had to spend a night in a police cell. And eventually the hotel records showed that, you know, he was in his hotel room. But as I say, there was nothing criminal. It was a bizarre thing. My own theory, and I think it's better, and it won't surprise you, it was a complete news of the world setup. Fun enough, my in-laws at the time had a place in La Manga, and they knew a guy, a News of the World reporter, who was never there other than in the summer. But suddenly he was there in La Manga, and there was other things. The girls, amazingly, the girls' rooms were on the same floor as our players. Now, you know, how did that happen? And, you know, there were things done that you would say were stupid, but not illegal or anything. You know, one player had something to explain to his wife. One probably had something to explain to his teammates, but they did nothing wrong. But of course, it got to people, and poor old Mickey Adams, it really got to. He was there fending it all off. And, you know, I think that was the start of the end for Mickey. He was a really decent bloke. But after that, you know, he found the pressures a lot. And as we know, he ended up, he was a true resignation, I think, in November of that year. But it was, you know, it was not what it was portrayed at. The funniest one was, to tell you this one. So I normally just buy the Times. And anyway, the shop at the end of my road, Mrs. Patel ran it. And suddenly I was going in and buying all the tabloids and everything every day. And this was literally every day. And then suddenly she tapped me on the shoulder one morning and said, James, you just buy the Times, go and take the others over by the freezer, read them there, just put them back, and that'll be all right. And it was fantastic.
James has what you might call the innocent's view of this. I'd heard about it probably the night before James did, in that Paul Mace rang me and said, I'd ceased to be a director at this point, but the Jim McCahill had disappeared. We never knew where he went. He didn't emerge till the whole thing was over. He rang me up and said, we're in trouble. The players are in La Manga. I said, what are they doing out there? And he said, oh, well, Mickey decided to give them a break, because we'd had a previous incident in La Manga when Martin O'Neill, in probably one of the worst mistakes of his career, put John Robertson in charge of who can run a piss up in a brewery, in charge of and Stan Collymore let off a fire extinguisher and God knows what. I mean, the choice of La Manga as a place to go was pretty stupid. We were bottom of the league. There was, not massive disenchantment, but the players weren't, you know, if you're bottom of the league, send them off on a jolly. You may do that, but it shouldn't be a jolly. It should be serious.
We beat Birmingham 1-0 after going to La Manga. You can't do that.
And I'll tell you why we did that. When we and anyway, I found out from Paul Mace. Greg Clark was around. He was in the country. He'd sadly left after, you know, setting up this deal. He left to work in Australia, but he was around that week. Tim Davis said, oh, they're all innocent. They're all innocent. I said, nobody who's up at 2 a.m. messing about with brass is innocent in this case. It will look terrible, which it did, and the fans will not like it, which they didn't. And Tim said, oh, we'll stay out here and get it sorted. I said, no, you won't. You'll get them on the first plane home. and we'll get an apology from the players for them behaving as they did, which is you can't behave like that. And Mickey rang me up. He was obviously disconsolate about the whole thing. I said, what were you doing, letting them out at 2 a.m? He said, I trusted them. Well, 20-year-old men who've got wads of cash in their pockets on a jolly in Spain with each other, they're not going to behave terribly well unless you give them really set rules. So the players did come back. The next bit was the manager, Tim Davis, said, no one's going to apologise. So I said, right, get me Dave Bassett on the phone, who was the director of football by this point. Dave was no nonsense. I like Dave, and he was a good director of football. Dave came on the phone and said, what do you think, John? What do you think? So I said, right, I'll tell you what I think. Unless you get one of the players to apologise within an hour, I'm taking my money out and I'll get a load of other people out and you'll be all out of a job and bottom of the division. And within an hour, he got Les Ferdinand to apologise. And yes, they did win on the Saturday, which was a reaction and was good, but we weren't good enough to stay up. The defence was not quite good enough, I'm afraid.
I have to say, I always thought it was down to John Curtis. It was obviously Wolves away, Middlesbrough away, and Tottenham at home. The 8 points that would have saved us.
I feel like you could have given away Rick's "Who Are You Now?" John Curtis.
One of my questions to James and John was going to be, which one affected you more, the Wolves debacle or the Middlesbrough one? I completely forgot about Spurs, but yeah, that John Curtis.
Okay, I have a unique take on Wolves. Because when I said my in-laws, my mother-in-law was Rachel Hayo Flint, who was on the board at Wolves. So we were in the boardroom. At half time, she wouldn't speak to me. At full time, I wouldn't speak to her.
We got a point at Middlesbrough, actually, to be fair. We lost at Wolves. And I mean, that was a dreadful result. We were ahead, a bit like the beginning of this season, funnily enough, in a lot of games. And couldn't hold on to it because the defence wasn't good enough. Bit similar again to this season.
Yeah, it was funny that you know the step up in the first 2 games. I saw it because Southampton at home, we went 2-0 up. Brilliant Les Ferdinand header, if you remember. But then Kevin Phillips came with that 35-yard rocket, and it was just, he thought, the quality of that. And then at Chelsea, we went, James Scowcroft put us 1 up, and we gave away this free kick, and then Mutu took it, and he took it with his right foot, hit the wall, came back to it, he volleyed it straight in with his left. And I thought, crikey, what a standard.
John, bringing it back to kind of where we're at right now, I want to get your take on the current ownership and also the current manager as well, Brendan Rodgers. But we'll start with the ownership, of course. I mean, it's obviously something you probably best placed to speak about. What have you made of their tenure overall?
Well, we're very fortunate, aren't we, to have, I confess, we knew nothing about them in the first place. I was a bit worried since they seemed incredibly naive. They had 1 or 2 people at the club who I would deem dodgy. Terry Robinson got a bad write-up from people within the game that I trusted. And David Richards, who got a bad write-up from everyone. I think Susan Whelan was obviously a very good appointment. She didn't know anything about the game when she came in. She'll admit that. But she's very smart, and she, in fact, stabilised it from that point of view. And then one of the best things, obviously the best thing that Mandrick did was he made the appointment of Nigel Pearson. I was not actually at that point very keen on. I thought we maybe could have done better. But he appointed Nigel Pearson. Then actually in an attempt to sell it, he sacked Nigel Pearson bizarrely and brought in Ericsson, as he thought that would appeal to the ties as being. I don't know. He bought in
Sousa
as someone who he thought would sell the club better to a foreign owner. Sousa, actually, who's been reasonably successful abroad as a manager, but he was a nice bloke. But he wasn't Nigel. Nigel should never have been dismissed at that point. We struggled a bit. Sousa didn't last very long. We bought in Ericsson, who to start with spent money like water. Never really, it never impressed me as a manager in the Premier League, really. And a bit of a sort of one of these characters. There was a bit of myth about him. He'd done well in Italy in his early career and Monaco, but he never did much good in England, really. Unfortunately, then, through the efforts of Alan Birchinall, we got Nigel Pearson and his team. His team were critical. He had Steve Walsh, who was possibly one of the best recruiters we've ever had, and Craig Shakespeare was a good coach. They got on well together. They worked really well as a team in terms of recruiting people. They made some fabulous signings, if you think about it. You know, they recruited Vardy for £1 million. They recruited Mark Albrighton for nothing. They recruited Fuchs for nothing. They recruited Kante for about 4 million. They recruited Huth. They made some terrific Mahrez, who Steve Walsh went to watch and was told to watch somebody else, but thought, no, this player's the right player. So they made some fabulous signings. They worked in harmony, and it all went, as we know, really well. Terry Robinson, Susan had the nous to get rid of him, or persuade Vishai to get rid of him. David Richards went soon afterwards. And the form picked up from there. And of course, you know, the Great Escape and whatever they did, it was an amazing story. It was something I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
No, of course not. I mean, you've obviously then seen lots of managers come and go as well during their time. I'm curious, John, if you had been on the board of directors or the chairman at the time, what would you have done with Brendan Rodgers this season? Would he still be in employment?
I'd have kept him, yeah, of course.
Yeah?
No, I mean, he is, on paper and in terms of trophies, as successful as anyone we've ever had. If you think about it, I mean, look at what's going on at the bottom. I mean, Southampton sacked one person. They want to appoint Jesse March. Why on earth would you want to appoint someone who's got Leeds in a mess? And Everton have gone through all sorts of managerial changes. Bring Sean Dyche from Frank Lampard. Talk about change of style, crikey. Then you get assistants who do well for a couple of games. Some freak results yesterday. I mean, Bournemouth, who've done really very little under Gary O'Neill, get a result, and Southampton do. So it's still tight. I mean, Potter, who everybody said, and if if Brendan would have gone, most people said, oh, we'll get Graham Potter. Well, he's, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? He's hardly won a game since he's gone to Chelsea, and Fofana has gone there, and I mean, he's not had a decent game for Chelsea. He's been injured, but he's not had a decent game.
I've got one final question, but I can leave it to the end. I'm just fascinated to ask John one final thing. It's nothing to do with the current subject.
Go on, Rick. Just because I'm conscious, James hasn't got a word in edgeways yet.
I'm used to that with your father, Jack. So it's all right.
I was just going to ask, what would you have done, James, as Mr. Positivity?
What now?
Would you have sacked Brendan?
No, I'm exactly in the same place. No, I think he is a good manager. I don't quite know what went on over the summer because, well, obviously not enough went on. If I was with him now, I'd just say, Brendan, at some points during the last few months, you've talked more of yourself and the club have been separate entities, and we're in this together and everything. And what I really hope now is that he remembers Top's loyalty to him, and And we know he's very well paid. I think all of us here know pretty much exactly what he's paid. So he's set up for life. We can safely say that. And at that point, Top has been very good to you. You now be good to Top.
Well, I think he has been, because he could have gone previously. And to be honest, I don't blame football managers. In the current circumstances, they have to look after themselves. It's very rare that when there's a bad run, the chief executive or the owner comes out. It's always the manager. It's always the manager straight after the game. I never spoke to Mickey Adams straight after a game, because, to be honest, they're too emotional and it's very difficult. And he has to look after himself. There is no doubt that a lot of people would have. And if you talk to people from other clubs, they would love to have him as manager.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, listen, would you sack Jurgen Klopp? Would you sack Graham Potter at the moment? There'll be a lot at those clubs. I mean, people wanted to sack Arteta the beginning of last season. Sometimes you have to decide. I don't think James would have ever sacked anyone as manager.
I was party to sacking Craig Levein. Thank you very much.
Curiously enough, I felt that Craig Levein.
I think you were also party to appointing him, James. To be fair,
I was hands up on both counts. Yes.
I think the problem with Craig Levein is, as I've said, Craig Levein had undoubtedly got a good record in Scotland when he came. He never managed in England. And Dave Bassett had been given the impression by Tim Davies that he was going to get the job, which Tim Davies was in no position to do that. And he shouldn't have done that. In consequence, Dave Bassett stomped off. So you'd got Craig Levein left without any experience from the English game other than Rob Kelly. Nice bloke, probably not strong enough, probably not ruthless enough, no director of football. And he brought down players from Scotland. And we all know, if you bring players down from Scotland, you've got to be very, very sure. He brought down some players who looked good in Scotland, but boy, did they look rubbish. There was a winger came. He was about 2 foot tall, Hamill. Great, they couldn't even touch.
We had him on Who Are You the other week.
Yeah, we all remembered him, obviously.
Yeah.
I always thought Craig Levein looked like a real, obviously, budget Scottish version of Clark Kent, didn't he? Oh, Superman with the glasses in.
Yes.
And to be honest, it was about as good as him in the end, but without any superpowers.
But Craig was, I liked him, but he was unbelievably arrogant. And I remember towards the end, we'd lost 7 on the trot. And I said, look, something has to change, Craig, and you have the first chance to change it. But, you have to do it. And I sat there with Rob Kelly, and then, Rob eventually took over. And Rob is a very decent bloke, and, and he saved us from going down, which was the great thing. Because one of the things, when you're on the board, at that time, the proudest record we had is we'd never be below the top 2 divisions. And I just couldn't countenance myself being on the board with us going down. I had sleepless nights about it, because it was looking iffy at points. But we turned around. And by the way, somebody we mentioned previously, Martin George, when Rob was there and it was looking dicey, Martin, he's a funny fish, but he knows football. And I just talked to him religiously. He used to go down the training ground, and they probably didn't like seeing him all the time. But when he came back to me and he said, James, he said, he has the players. We're going to be safe. The players are with him. And it was critical. And Martin knew this. And I listened to Martin. I listened to Jon as well. You don't have any choice but to listen to Jon. But yeah, I actually sort out Martin on this. And he was a great help. And he really, really does know football. Over the years, Leicester City's owed Martin George a lot.
Can I ask Jon one final question then?
Yes, mate.
Before I let these busy men get on with their Sundays. So, Jon, I mean, Gary Lineker is my all-time hero, and obviously, when I found out that with Jack and you, I was like, "Oh, brilliant!" The only reason why I'm on the podcast, I could ask, but
you want some crisps?
Well, no, but before the 1990 World Cup, I did not like football. I was like 6 or 7. The only thing I used to like back then were them horrible little hamsters, them Sylvanian families. But I got into I got into football, and my question is: was there ever even an inkling that Gary could have come back for a swan song season? I know we were a bit, you know, we didn't have them. No, nothing. What, even after Grand Passat, when he was?
Well, he never played again after Grand Passat. His toe had gone. We were pretty sure when he went to Japan that he had said to me, you know, it's I'm not sure. I certainly can't play for England, and I'm going to be struggling Premier League. This he got a bad injury. The surgeon in London did the wrong operation on his toe, and he actually virtually never played in Japan. And there was no doubt. We knew from about you know, probably 6 months before he finished, they kept doing operations and so on, but we knew it was up, and we were planning the career in broadcasting at that point.
I did get to see him in a testimonial. He put a shirt on back about
that was caused us a bit of problem, that because he'd sworn blind he wouldn't play again, and then Gordon tried to persuade him and so on, and you know, he's not played a lot of cricket since then, because he used to be wicketkeeper bat, but he struggles to take off. Your big toe is your taking off impulse. It was on his right foot.
I bet he'd not get around the snooker table very swiftly either, will he, with a big toe?
No, well, he could get round that. He played a lot of golf. He was a good golfer.
Yeah, he's a very good golfer. Yeah, he is.
But Gary has, with games, I don't think he played snooker for yonks, and he gave up golf a few years ago. He has a sort of, I know what he means, because I'm nowhere near. I'm not even within a breath of being that level of sportsman, but I understand with people who get to a certain level and then say, I'm not going to get any better, I'm going to do the next thing.
He said
his best break. Gave up golf, Dad?
Sorry?
Is that why you gave up golf?
Yeah.
We're still waiting for the next thing.
Well, Lineker said his best break was 135 on Twitter last week. And I'll be going down the club later to play a few shots, and my best break's about 23. So
he was a seriously good player. He was a seriously good cricketer as well. I mean, I can remember talking to him when he was quite young, because I always talked to the players about what they were going to do when they finished off. And I can remember saying to him, what would you have done if you hadn't been a footballer? And he said, I'd have been a cricketer, which I thought was quite quick. So I said, okay, smart ass, what if I've broken both your legs? And he said, I'd like to be a sports journalist, but I can't do that. And I said, why? Why do you think you couldn't do that? He said, because I'm not trained. I said, listen, I was a journalist once. I'll tell you, the only training you get is how to fiddle your expenses. That's it. Ask any journalist of the era I grew up in. That was it.
Brilliant.
Right, have we got any more, lads? No, are we all done?
No, we're all good.
Well, just then one last one from me for both of you, really. Obviously, you know, both Leicester fans and still go to this day every week to watch the football club. I mean, listen to you both talk about the club and your time there. It's nice, isn't it, doing nostalgia stuff? Did you enjoy it at the time, or do you enjoy it more now talking about the old times?
Do you mean when sort of we're on the board, or when
Mandrich threw you out of the ground?
Oh yes, I was banned by Mandrich. I made a reference one night to the totalitarian regime, and he didn't seem to like it. But it was quite an easy fix, because I just walked around the other side of the ground and got in. But it was all right. I found the book. I have to say, it was nothing. Being a fan, being on the board just added to the pressures. And as I said, I had sleepless nights about us looking like we were going to be relegated to what is truly Division 3.
Yeah.
That was, I didn't like that at all. You know, the responsibility weighs on you. We've never been there. You know, so that I'm much enjoying the fact. Anyway, we've just had the most unbelievable time recently. But I loved the old days. I loved it. You couldn't enjoy this without having the bit that went before. It all builds up. We've all got our own histories with it, and it is. And it's so. Yeah, I would have said I'm not queuing up to go on the board again. Let's put it that way.
It's a horrible job, actually. It spoils your enjoyment. It was always, you know, my great pastime. It's, you know, it's always been part of my life since I was 7 years old. So 65 years, you know, 3 cup finals in the 1960s when we were a pretty good side in those days. And then in the 70s, we were not a bad side for a spell under Bloomfield. And then we had the O'Neill years, and we won the League Cup twice, crikey. And I thought that was fantastic. And I thought that was about as far as we're going to get. And then the second of those occasions, there were 3 generations of my family. My father was still alive then, and Jack and I sat together, and Gary and his father, and 1 or 2 of his boys. Can you remember? Jack, was it?
Yeah, I think
all sat together, and you know that was a
Harry,
great moment.
Harry and Tobias went, I think. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So it was, you know, it's been part of my life all the way through. It was nice to be able to make sure that the club didn't go out of business. And obviously you think back and say, did anything we did help what happened later come? Well, absolutely not directly, but I think it kept us alive at that point. And had we not been kept alive and had to be reconstructed in a lower division or whatever, then I don't think the ties had come in, and so that wouldn't have happened. So you take some sort of pleasure from that. Did I enjoy doing the job? No, not really. No, it's a rotten job because the manager always wants at least 2 new players. That's a constant. The people in the boxes want better sausages or something. The fans all want you I mean, they're shouting, get your money out. I mean, if I got my money out, it buys somebody's little finger for half an hour, you know. It's nonsense.
One of the funniest things I've been around the boardroom, you know, you analyse the team's performance, and the boardroom discussion was exactly the same discussion as I would have with my mates down the pub. There's no great insight.
Well, look, we're all incredibly grateful anyway that you guys did step up and do what you did back then, and of course also massively grateful that you've given them the time this evening to share all them stories. I know that, I mean, I speak for myself and the lads, we've really, really enjoyed that. I'm sure all the listeners have done as well. So yeah, it's very, very much appreciated, guys. Thank you very much.
Bills in the post. See ya.
Yes. Anyway,
Cheers, John.
take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Cheers.